workshop. Time now is 6:05. First item on the agenda is presentation of update by Fathom. Mr. Signani.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. We have Jason Bethke again from Fathom here to give us a brief update on the progress. So, Jason, all yours.
So, is there a way to start it? I don't know if it's on.
Just turn it on.
There we go. Sorry. Thank you for having me back. I appreciate it. I think the last time I was here was in July when we were signing the contract to get this project started. So we wanted to come in and just give a brief update on where we were with the utility billing, the new metering AMI project, and the modernization of the customer service. So just as a quick rehash, these are some of the goals we set out for the project early. You've seen much of this before, but really to meet the emerging expectations with data and new tools for the utility billing and public works departments. Really give customers the opportunity to use that data to make good choices around how they're using water, enable them for self-service and to self-manage their consumption, improve the metering accuracy, and replace all of the aging infrastructure meters in the community, as well as improve customer service or enhance customer service with additional call center capabilities, and also provide a local office for outreach and bill payment. In addition to that, we wanted to focus on maximizing the collection of existing revenues to ensure that all the customers are paying their fair share, which will allow for, we hope, rates to go up more slowly or not go up at all. And really enable the proactive management of water consumption by the customers to really control their own water usage. Ultimately do all of this without increasing rates to the community through the project. So the project is self-funding. Quick high-level summary of the sort of the parts of this project. First, the piece that we're just nearing the completion of, which is the managed services, or the installing the new utility billing platform, standing up the new local payment office, all the software associated with that. That will be live here in January 15th. Then we'll begin the second phase of the project, which is the installation of all the meters and AMI equipment. That'll start near the end of January, and ultimately through this process, the software around meter data management and work order management that'll help the utility department, as well as the software that reaches out to the customers for their portal and app engagement will also be evolving through that process. So just quickly, from an update perspective, we moved the go-live date for the utility billing platform to January 15th. We just wanted to avoid any confusion around the holidays, so we pushed that back a few months. That'll also coincide with the time we open the new local facility. We have completed all the review of all the existing meters, so we've gone to all the homes, looked at all of the meters. We understand the infrastructure there, so we'll be able to start installing meters a couple weeks after the new software goes live, so near the end of January. And we expect for all of that to be completed by the end of May timeframe. So for your customers, a little bit on what they will experience here in the coming months is, coming in January, we'll send out the first explanation letter on what's changing, what the new bills will look like. Those bills, those will go out sort of first part of January, with new bills going out to customers a couple weeks after the go live around the end of January. I think January 31st is the first day. And oftentimes at this point, people ask a lot about how their payment options work, and so we're transferring all of the sort of auto debit or ACH payments directly into the new platform, so the customers won't have to do anything in regards to folks who pay that way. For those who are paying via credit card, we'll ask them to re-input their credit card numbers as they sign up for the new portal. That goes to some of the credit card compliance elements. And then one thing I like to point out for customers is, if they do have auto pay with their bank, we will get the payment, no problem, but sometimes there's a little bit of delay unless they go in and change the address that the bank's actually sending it to. So I ask folks to change that when they get a chance. It'll save 3 or 4 days in their payment processing time. We talked a little bit about the customer service center being open here in January 15th. And then once we get that up and running, we'll start into the meter installation process. And just so the customers have a sense of what's going to happen there, essentially we'll first get a letter out so that everyone understands what the process is. Then a couple days before we're on site, we'll hang a door hanger letting them know that we're going to be there. That door hanger essentially says that they'll be off service for about an hour. Typically that takes 15 to 30 minutes to actually do, but we like to over-deliver from that perspective. And then once that's installed, the portal, about a week afterwards, we just like to run a few data quality checks before they go live with the customers. So that's sort of the cadence that we'll see, and we'll do that beginning the end of January and hope to be completed by around the end of May. I also like to point out this particular feature. When customers are looking for the new account number on the platform, they can come online, they can type in their old account number, and this will give them their new account number. So that way they can easily register for the portal right after the crews are there installing the meters and don't have to necessarily call anyone. And then lastly, I just wanted to highlight the local office. So you have the location there. That'll be open between 8 a.m. and 5 p.m. We have hired the leader for that local office. She worked in Keller for the last 13 years. Her name is Tracy Friedel. You can see a picture of her there. And so she has been up in our office in Phoenix training for the last month and a half, and she's really looking forward to getting started here in Haltom City. So last piece was I wanted to really thank staff as we went through this project, both in billing and on the information technology side. The staff has really done an amazing job of getting us information and also implementing many of the sort of policies as we go through to make sure that transition to Fathom is as smooth as possible. So we really appreciate that. David Serrano also put up a page for the community on your website. So with that, I will say thank you and I guess open it to any questions.
Fantastic. Thank you, sir. Are there any questions or comments from the council? Yes, sir, Mr. Brown.
When you do switch out the meters, even though you've left the hangers on the doors, will you almost always try to have someone home? I mean, I get into the liability part. I don't know for us, for you guys. What if grandma's in the house and on some type of machine that requires water? Will you try at all to make sure that someone's at home and knock on the door and let them know?
Yeah, so a couple things we're doing. So one, on the door hanger, I think it asks if you have any medical conditions that you let us know, in which case we will schedule an appointment for those particular cases. So if there's anybody who has dialysis machines or things like that, we ask that they call us, and that way we'll ensure that we won't change it without scheduling the appointment. And then on the installations, we'll always look at the meter before we start the removal, make sure there's no water flowing through it at the time we turn it off, and that when we put it in, before we turn it back on, we'll ensure that there's no water going through it when we're finished. And so that way we know that we're not causing any issues inside the home. So that's what we do today.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilmember Brown. Councilmember Fowler.
Quick on will there be an area of town when you start that's going to experience, I don't know if y'all kind of forensically looked at all the system, is there going to be an area where we probably experience higher meter readings just because of the antiquated meters that we should prepare for? I guess one reason I'm asking, if you start putting these in and we're in areas that the meters are already reading pretty accurate, we probably won't anticipate much of a change in a billing cycle or billing system. But if we get into some of the areas, I don't know, and there may not be, that are that bad, but I know that that's one of the reasons is us capturing some of the water loss that we have. When we capture that loss, there's going to be that's going to be transferred to to the customer on the other side. So, but is there an area that we need to anticipate, or is that something that y'all could work with Mr. Van Nuynhuis so that we're a little forewarned? Because, once that takes place, especially as we start getting into, April and May.
Yep, I understand the concern. I don't know that I can answer the question tonight exactly where the areas are. I'm happy to work with the team to see what we can find around that. I will say that many of the revenue increases that we find are a function of just sort of cleaning up the data anomalies. When we clean up the data anomalies, we will be able to give those to staff directly, and if we want to reach out to customers proactively, we can do that too.
Well, I just didn't know from past experience if y'all, if you've seen some areas in an older town where you've gone in, or one sector of town, if we have one that's still very, highly antiquated meters, if we should anticipate ahead of time, because, that's the last thing we need, is people getting $20 and $30 a month more bills, and then all of a sudden, what's the reason for it? And we need to be able to, I think we need to just be prepared when we move into that section of town ahead of time to prevent that from happening. Prevent it from happening, but we'll at least be prepared for it.
Yep, no, that's a good point. So the older the meter, the higher the propensity for that issue to occur. So we'll identify it best we can, and agreed on that. We'll also flag large consumption changes from the previous month to the new month when the new meters go in. So again, if that's happening, we can proactively reach out to customers.
Well, I just think that's a lot of this is, being prepared for the changeover, because there's going to be people that their meters, that things I'm sure are going to be different, and we're going to, I would just like for us to be prepared, or as prepared as possible.
Great. Well, I appreciate the comment.
Thank you, Councilmember Fowler. Are there any other questions or comments? None? Fantastic presentation, and thank you. I'm excited about this. This is another step in the right direction to modernize our aging infrastructure. Thank you.
Okay, thank you all. Appreciate the time.
Moving right along to discussion of possible May 2018 bond election. Mr. City Manager.
Yes, Mayor and Council. I want to introduce tonight, we've had some folks that are interested in speaking with Trent and asking him some questions about the bond election and P3s and all that kind of stuff. So we have Trent here tonight. We also have David Campbell again. You remember him from last Tuesday night, and Hap Baggett. Everybody remembers Hap. So they've agreed to come here too, just in case there are any questions that you have for them. So Trent.
Thank you, Keith. Good evening, everyone. Good to see everyone. Good to see Hap, frankly. Hadn't expected to see him in this good a shape given his last several weeks, so good to see you, Hap. Last time we were here, we outlined some basic guidelines relative to P3, and I'll go through some of those tonight, and primarily, I think, leave most of my time for questions. And I don't want to get too far into Wayne's world either. So, Wayne, I know a lot of these things really get into specific legal issues related to how a P3 project is done. But in essence, when you think about a public-private partnership, from a city's perspective, what we're talking about is an alternative financing arrangement. And that alternative financing arrangement can take a lot of different forms and can be used for a lot of different purposes. It can be used for a city facility. It can be used to renovate infrastructure. It can be used to do anything that you would essentially take your public dollars for and spend yourself, that instead you could contract with a private entity to come and do on your behalf. And it's really that simple. We look at these projects across the state in light typically of from those toll roads, help pay that debt off. That's on a macro scale. On a smaller scale, they can even be used to finance a city park or a city building, such as a city hall. And the way that works essentially is the city will outline a project, a venture that the city wants to accomplish that serves a public purpose. And I should say all of this was made possible by Senate Bill 1048 back in 2011. The Public and Private Facilities Infrastructure Act was adopted. So that's the enabling legislation that allows these things to occur. But in essence, in the case where a city wanted to look at a building being built in a public-private partnership, you would essentially think of yourself as a tenant. You would think of yourself as leasing a facility that the private sector was going to finance and build and own and maintain, and you would see yourself simply as the tenant in that building. So when would that potentially be an appropriate decision to make? If you have a city that has a very sensitive property tax rate relative to your debt to asset ratio, in other words, you really don't have much capacity to go issue a lot more debt, or you don't have the desire to issue a lot more debt. If your tax rate is particularly sensitive and you don't want to go take on additional debt obligations, then essentially the private sector would take that debt obligation on, and you would pay for that project annually through what amounts to rent for that facility. The private sector would finance that probably anywhere from 35 to 99 years. You have to be able to do these over a long period of time because, in essence, the private sector's financing sources want to make sure that the asset will be completely depreciated by virtue of the lease that you signed to occupy that building. So these things take a long, long time. That also keeps your capital obligations low because all you're doing is programming into your operations and maintenance budget a line item that will say rent for building X. And you essentially are now leasing that space for that long period of time. It's a relatively easy decision for the private sector to finance because when I can bring to the table something as stable as a city government and knowing that that city government's not going anywhere and that's about as solid a tenant as you can get, it's very easy to finance those things in the traditional market. There's also examples where that financing can still take advantage of tax-exempt debt. And those aren't in every situation, but in some situations they are. And I'll get into a little bit of detail. And believe it or not, what Congress is doing as we speak has a big impact on this because the Tax Reform Act in the House and the Senate are both targeting one particular project. It's called a private activity bond. And a private activity bond is one thing that has been used in P3 partnerships to essentially be able to issue a non-recourse debt on behalf of the city that is a private activity bond that essentially has been used for housing, healthcare, infrastructure, many, many other projects. Currently, there is a big push to reduce the amount of projects that a private activity bond can be used for, and we don't know until the legislation finally passes exactly what limitations could come with that. But the point is there are still actually private tax-exempt dollars that can be reached through this project as long as it's being used for a public purpose. And that's the key that we always look for. There has to be a public purpose that is being served by this. So specific to something that a city that did not necessarily have a lot of room to raise taxes, but that really needs new facilities, you're essentially looking to the private sector to build those facilities, negotiate a term with them, and occupy that facility and pay what amounts to rent for the next X number of years. And that's about as simple as it gets. And these things can take form in everything you can imagine. The city of Austin, the city of Dallas, the city of San Antonio, all these cities have used P3 projects. They're very, very common, and they have now been around for some period of time. What becomes crucial is the process that you observe to make that happen. The first thing you want to do is you would want to agree on what your public-private partnership guidelines would be. You'd set some broad parameters that say these are the type of facilities whereby we would consider entering into a public-private partnership. Once you agree on those guidelines, you would probably prepare an RFP or an RFQ that would be publicly available where interested parties would be able to say, look, I will propose to build X facility on your behalf. And you would then go through a process of evaluating those proposals and selecting the one that you like. And that would all be done in the same manner that you would approve any other decision at the council level. More than likely, there would be negotiated terms attached to that. Things like how long will this last? Things like what will be the dispensation of the building at the end of the term? In other words, how would it transition back to the city? Propositions like do we or do we not contribute land to the deal? A lot of those questions come up in the details of that actual contract. You would then, after you've made your selection, negotiated your terms, you'd enter into a development agreement, which all of you are familiar with and have seen 100 times. This would just simply be another development agreement that, again, would go through the public process to make sure that it's articulated all the elements that you want to achieve. So, the keys are this. We have to serve a public use. It has to be something that can be financed and marketed in a way that a private sector would be interested in purchasing that, interested in building that. It needs to be something that, in essence, you would say is large enough that we would have probably considered issuing debt for it otherwise. Whereas were it not for this decision, we would have probably gone out there and issued debt. The benefit, again, is you are not having to now carry this as a capital obligation where your debt service now, your debt to asset ratio has been bumped because now you have a much higher debt burden because now you're paying for this through annual operations. Is it cheaper? Not necessarily. If you take a traditional certificate of obligation and say, I'm going to go issue a $20 million certificate of obligation, I'm going to pay 3.25% on that for 20 years, it's not necessarily cheaper to look at a private partnership. But in the event that you don't want to impact your tax rate or that you don't want to take on additional capital obligations and increase your debt service amount, but you need the facilities and you need the facilities soon, then in that circumstance, it's probably worth it. And the ultimate cost becomes a negotiated cost between you and the entity that you choose to build a project. So that's a 30,000-foot view of public-private partnerships. They are commonly used, like I said, for everything from toll roads to parks to buildings. And so what I want to be able to do is kind of reserve the rest of my time to answer any questions that you may have and examples that you can think of that we could say, would this or would this not work? And again, I'll tap Wayne to help me with that. But it's certainly not something that is outside the box anymore. This is not a exotic, creative thing that no cities have ever done. It's becoming more and more common. The legislation's been around now for 6 years, and we're seeing more and more opportunities to use it. When cities get into circumstances where their tax rate is so high that they really don't want to go ask for additional debt, but their operating dollars are stable, and they're comfortable that those operating dollars are going to stay stable, it becomes an alternative that might be beneficial to you. So, Mayor, I'll reserve the rest of the time for any questions I can answer.
Thank you, Mr. Petty, and thank you for being here with us tonight, and also for your presentation. Are there any questions from the council for Mr. Petty? Let's see. Here's that. Councilmember Fowler.
Thank you, Mr. Petty.
Sure.
Traditionally, though, you'd made mention to it, the largest quantity I've seen or the largest exercise in this has typically been in the toll road system.
That's a big example.
As far as buildings, though, what would be the advantage? Because, like you said, I mean, you're deferring it because you're just moving it. All you're doing is moving it from INS side or your interest side to your M&O, so your daily operations.
That's
so
right.
What's the advantage of doing that if you're going from a 35 to, say, a 99-year note?
You've pushed the risk of the capital onto the private sector because the city has not absorbed any additional risk related to issuance of debt. You've not had to go to the voters and issue a general obligation bond. You've not made the decision to issue a certificate of obligation. So by simply moving that to the INS side, off the INS side onto the O&M side, you've really done just that. You've impacted the operating budget without having to go out there and increase the debt service payments. Now, if you're already paying O&M for the use of the facility that you plan to build, then you're expensing something now today. If I'm looking at a city hall, for example, I'm paying essentially for electric, and I'm paying for maintenance, I'm paying for upkeep, and I'm paying for repairs, and I'm paying for replacing the roof, and I'm paying for replacing the carpet, and I'm paying to tear out walls. There are costs associated with an existing building that you are in. Those costs would generally go away, and there would be a rent that would be paid for a new building that someone else owns, that someone else maintains on their balance sheet, on their asset list, so you are not carrying that. So again, it's not, I don't want to couch it as this is a huge savings opportunity. I want to couch it as an alternative financial tool that will allow you to get into a new facility without necessarily having to issue debt to go build it.
Well, and I can understand and appreciate that. It's just the school of thought that you come from. If we have X amount of space right now that's potentially there for future bond passage, we're fixing to pay off some debt. So we have a certain capacity there that we have to work with. I don't know where it becomes advantageous to us to look at it from the standpoint of still you're transferring it from INS to M&O, and we don't know from the maintenance side, you know, what happens if we run through another economy where there's a downturn. You know, we've got if you look at it from the INS side, you've got a fixed cost and you've got a fixed interest rate, and you know where you're at, and that's, you know,
You would have that in this too.
we've budgeted for it, but yet if you're on the M&O side though, you're still, that's mainly your tax generated side of your.
Yeah, the stability factor doesn't change. You're still going to have, because you're going to have a negotiated contract that's going to determine your cost from the get-go. And there would be increases programmed in. So you'd be able to program that just like you would any other O&M expense every year. So there wouldn't be necessarily, there wouldn't be more likelihood of risk from a bad economy that would impact your cost, because that cost is set by contract. But it doesn't change the overall obligation. If we look at all the assets of the city and we look at that in the cash flow statement, it's not going to have a gigantic impact on cash flow, but it will have an impact on assets and liabilities relative to the amount of debt that you are carrying. And so that debt is transferred. And in that regard, depending on your negotiating skills and depending on the private sector's appetite for a project like this, you could end up very close to even. And that's the good thing about this is you can take advantage of private sector builders and private sector markets that understand the most efficient way to build buildings, the most efficient way to design, being able to do it in a manner that may be a little bit out of the box. You really take advantage of that brain power to the extent that you're talking about, for example, LEED certification or other energy savings or conservation mechanisms. You can build those things into your parameters, and then the good news is you're essentially now accessing private sector competition that come out and try to give you the best proposal they can. So everyone's going to work hard on their margins if they want the project in order to be awarded the project. So it's not for every city, that's for sure, and it certainly doesn't. It shouldn't be viewed as a dramatic way to save money. It should be viewed as an alternative financing mechanism that would avoid or delay or defer your need to go out there and issue tax debt. If you have a property tax of X today, and this last year, I think you were one of the cities, a lot of cities dropped their taxes down to their effective rate, or they dropped it to some point close to the new effective rate, and that was all over the Metroplex. Well, what that does practically is when you have to put a bond election on for voters to consider, now I'm talking about recovering what I had before that I've basically given back in addition to the new debt, which I have to have. So it sometimes can be seen as sticker shock when I'm going to have to go look at a property tax rate increase, and that could be difficult enough to get as it is. If we're just looking at cash flow, we want to avoid the sticker shock of that eventuality, then this is an alternative that would do that. And many cities find themselves in that situation. We live in a country today where cities mostly are at the end of their life when it comes to the infrastructure that they have. Most of their infrastructure is falling apart. And so when you look nationwide, the reason there's been so much push on private activity bonds and infrastructure redevelopment is because it's all old and it's all wearing out at the same time. So the ability to go issue debt to cover all of those expenses for all of that infrastructure is really an impractical and implausible circumstance. So cities have to take it out over years and years and years, many times way beyond the life of the asset. This allows you essentially to take advantage of improving that asset, probably dropping your O&M costs and efficiency, certainly improving your efficiency in a way that doesn't make you measure that out over 20 or 30 years of replacing, deteriorating infrastructure. So it is one mechanism, certainly not a cure-all, but I think I wouldn't consider it any more risky when it comes to impact on O&M.
Okay. Do you have any communities that are close that are doing that as far as from facilities, the building structures themselves?
I do not as a consultant personally, but I know of several in Austin and Dallas and San Antonio where this has been done. And mostly large cities, but that's not to say there hadn't been small cities do it too.
Okay. Thank you, Trent.
Sir.
Thank you, Mr. Fowler. Councilmember Nunn.
Thank you, Mayor. You said you know of several. What type of buildings, what type of structures are they involved in?
Anything that would be, let's say there is a community recreation center or a civic center complex, something of that nature. In that case, those are revenue generating areas. And so you could say, okay, well, let's monetize the cost to use that facility. So let's say there's a user fee associated with that. Well, much like a toll road, the user fee becomes the dollars that get pledged to pay off the obligation. Not all circumstances, though, are going to be an enterprise. Let's say it is a building, a police building, or a city hall. Those are not going to have any dollars attached to them in terms of new revenue. Mm-hmm. So that just becomes an additional O&M expense. But any of those buildings would work. Those that have a revenue attached to them are always easier because we can offset some of the pressure on the property tax with the new revenues that are produced. So it's a little easier on that side of the equation, but any building would work, and there's really no limitation on that at all. I think it should be a substantial building that you would otherwise consider issuing debt for, because otherwise you're going through a whole lot of time and administrative activities for really not a whole lot of gain.
Okay. I guess I was maybe asking for more specifics as to, you said you knew of some in Austin, some in San Antonio and Dallas.
San Antonio primarily is used them for infrastructure projects, not a lot of buildings, although I believe they've done a civic complex in San Antonio. Dallas is currently looking at one for parks. And I can't give you specifics. I'm sorry, council member. I haven't, other than knowing about the tool and visiting with Keith about it as an option. We can certainly put together a long list of cities that have done this. I only have a few tonight that we can generically refer to.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Councilmember Nunn. Councilmember Grow.
Hey, Trent.
Yes, sir.
I'm just curious, what would be the motivation for a developer to put let's say a 3-story building that will house City Hall and police station? Because I'm just trying to, they don't, I guess they're going to quasi-own the property, or
they will.
But like you said, at the end of the term of the lease, there's going to be some disposition or something's going to happen with the property.
Right.
Either the city goes and buys it for $1 or whatever. And so I'm just trying to figure out what the motivation is.
Their motivation is profit, as always is the private sector. They will have programmed into the deal an internal rate of return that will compensate them for what they are paying for that structure. And typically you're going to expect a 7 and 7.5% ROI that will be built into the deal, and they will make money on that every year. So from the private sector side, it's clearly a profit opportunity for them. And I think there's no other way to put it.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Councilmember Grow. Councilmember Brown.
Thank you, Trent, for being here. 2 or 3 questions. Does a P3, if we did enter into some kind of P3 agreement, and then in the future we did want to issue bonds, does a P3, us being tied into a P3, does that affect our credit rating at all?
No, it wouldn't affect your credit rating. I think what you would do in that case, Councilman, is you would design your project in a way that says we would want to be able to purchase the facility at X point in the deal. And that way the financing that they would structure would have to take that into consideration. It would only affect your credit to the extent that you went out there and obligated yourself for that and couldn't afford to do it. That would be where Standard & Poor's and Moody's and your financial advisor would say, wait, hold the phone. You really don't have the debt capacity to do what you just did. But as long as it's being kept within the confines of the operating dollars that you have continued to program, shouldn't have any impact at all on your bond rating or your debt capacity.
Secondly, of course, I know whether we're paying it through a lease, some type of P3 agreement through M&O, or through INS, I guess we'd need to look at how it would affect the tax rate on either one of those. My final question, when you get, like the EDC owns the land on either property that we're going to look at, how would that work, us already owning the land? That's
a benefit. It's certainly a benefit for you because as you have considered in past circumstances, you would have the ability to contribute the land to the project, which obviously just reduces the overall project cost. If you were having to go out there and buy a piece of property, that's just weighing down the debt even more. So you would have the ability to say, let's take a couple of examples. We will contribute the land, and therefore your price quote that you give us to go build a facility should take into consideration the land as already being contributed, which is great for them because that might, this is probably going to be financed at somewhere around 65-35 debt to equity. And so if I can put the land in there in a fashion that would really take up most of the equity in the deal, then that just reduces the amount of equity that the private sector would have to be putting into the deal. So that land essentially becomes the quote down payment, if you will, and relieves that cash burden. I think there's other circumstances where you could say we will contribute the land at X price, or we will contribute the land at X price and expect to be paid over this period of time, this price for the land. So I think there's a number of different ways you could use the land to your advantage and either be compensated for it back through the deal or use it as equity to reduce the overall cost. But the fact that you have the land is a huge benefit for you.
And I'm sure the private sector is going to be able to go to any lending institution, and the lending institution is going to see this is going to a government entity, then they're probably going to be able to get their funds at least, 2 points below?
Maybe not 2, but there's clearly going to be a desire and an appetite, and there is a desire and appetite by private banking or by other investing firms just for this kind of dollar, because this is just about as safe as it gets. If a bank's going to say, look, I'll be happy to loan money because the city of Haltom City is going to enter into a 50-year lease, that's past my depreciation of this building, that's a no-brainer. So I think what we would want to do, though, in structuring a deal is we would try to access those public tax-exempt finance markets first. And as I mentioned, maybe the private activity bond may have some pressure on it. This may or may not qualify, or depending on how the legislation ultimately gets written. If we can access private, because this is for a public use. So a private activity bond, for example, could be used, and that's going to take you back down to almost the same tax rate, same rate that you would pay today for a CO or for a GO. So you'd probably save, in that case, 200 basis points by accessing those, that tax-exempt market. And that's what we would do first. And if that's out there, I think that's certainly the way to do it, because now we've reduced even more the O&M additional cost for the project. What you don't want to do is have to go out there and pay 8 or 9% and monetize 8 or 9% into your lease, because your O&M is really then going to get hit. You've paid too much at that point. So I think we would want to access as much as we can public sector markets that have access to tax-exempt debt. Then we'd want to structure the terms in a way that would be beneficial to the city and still be able to turn a decent ROI for the project.
And one final thing, Mr. Petty, the private sector, will they try to influence our design of our building whatsoever?
I think you would want to give to them enough information in your RFP to say this is the purpose, this is what we anticipate in terms of use for the facility, to the extent that there were any extenuating circumstances that would not normally be considered. I think you'd want to articulate that in your RFP. I think you would want the private sector to have the freedom to give you design ideas. Let us work with you and maybe look at some efficiencies and be able to engineer it in a way where you could take advantage of their expertise as well. But certainly not to the extent that you just turn the project over and say, you guys go build whatever you need. You're going to have a great deal of influence over that. In fact, in some cases, there's actually committees that are established where the private sector would have to come back and bring before a committee design guidelines and design aspects so that you get what you want, because they're building a project for you and they're going to need and want your input during that project for sure.
Wonder time-wise, I look at it now, there's almost a third party, so they would, if we choose Hewlett-Zoller, someone like that, they would be working with Hewlett-Zoller. Hewlett-Zoller would come back to council or committee or whoever then. So do you see that adding time-wise, a time frame?
If for example, if Hewitt-Zollars has a site plan that you are comfortable with today, and they have gone deep enough into the project where you feel that we can save all of that design time, and you simply say, this is the design that we want, then absent some minor recommendations relative to, cost engineering, they're probably going to go build exactly that. So if you start from scratch, you are going to add a bunch more time to it. But I would think that all the work that you've done for City Hall and Law Enforcement Center, that you would provide that in the RFP and say these are what we intend to build, and we're happy to take recommendations, but this should save a great deal of time in trying to get a concept approved that's already been looked at.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
And once again, thank you for being here,
Yes, sir.
Mr. Petty.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Councilmember Fowler.
Mr. Petty, can I assume that a P3 would follow the same electoral process or electoral path that a GO would?
No.
No.
P3 would not require an election. Of course, a CO doesn't either.
Right.
But it would require council approval, but it would not require voter approval.
So it would be virtually the same thing as a CO that we're issuing.
In terms of governance process, yes.
Do you, from your past experience, do you think that large of an initiative in a community our size would make sense?
Well, that's a trick question.
Question that has to be answered.
That's you do have to answer that question, and this always becomes, this is an analysis that says which is better for the city in the long term. If you have a substantial concern about additional debt and the likelihood of difficulty of raising the taxes to the point of covering this much new debt, then this is an alternative. It's certainly not something that should be seen as a fix-all. It shouldn't be seen as something that goes around the public, because this process will be as public as any CO would be. It really becomes a question of, can we get the project that we want without having to go out there and increase the debt service portion of our tax rate to pay for it?
But it's very non-traditional to skip the voter on something that's initiative that this large.
A lot of COs get issued.
Oh, COs, and I agree, but not to the magnitude of the level of what this would require.
And that's a political decision that council will have to make. If the council believes that the only way to approach this is to take it before the voters, then obviously this is just an alternative that was talked about. But there are circumstances where it has been beneficial, and you've been able to push risk off, and there's financial justification for it. Notwithstanding the politics, that would be your department, but it could be structured financially in a way that would, I think, probably make sense.
Well, and I wholeheartedly agree with you on revenue-producing properties or revenue-producing facilities. I think that it does make sense because you're offsetting, and it's something that's going to somewhat pay for itself. Right. Municipal buildings themselves don't necessarily pay for themselves at all. It's just it's a necessity that we have to operate.
That's right.
I would just think it would be difficult to bypass a voter. And the thing is if we have a certain capacity, I tend to lean more towards GEOs just because you have a certain capacity here that we already are experiencing. So let's just say we need to be, our capacity is 21 million or somewhere in that neighborhood, and we need to be at 30 million. We're talking about $9 million additional dollars. You put that before the voters, but then if you make the executive decision to bypass them on a $30 million issue, now it's a little different scenario.
I completely concur, and I think that's where the policy decisions got to be made at the council level to say at what point and what facilities would. And I don't want to couch this as only an opportunity to talk about a city hall. I want to couch this in terms of the opportunities that P3 gives cities in order to create alternative financing scenarios. Whether it works for City Hall in terms of your policy input is for you to decide. But I think you still need to take into account there probably is merit to understanding more about P3 type financing for other uses.
Well, and I concur with you. I think that one example is the Keller Point. I believe that swimming facility and all was.
It's a joint between the city and the school district.
But it was originally, wasn't it? But it's run privately, even though it's a joint facility.
Yeah, they have a company that runs.
Right. They brought in a private company to, it's somewhat of a form of a E3.
And you could take the position that any project, and there are many of these in North Texas, where a developer has come in and built a large development that includes city facilities. You got Colleyville with the library and the city hall in their project. You've got Keller with the city hall in their project. You've got the city of Southlake with city hall and the county administration building and the library in their facilities. To some extent, all of those are P3 type circumstances, because it's circumstances where a developer came in and built a large development that included some public sector, buildings in it. So in essence, all of those to some extent are P3. They're just not as clear cut as what we're talking about here on a specific use where you'd be looking at one building or one component of infrastructure. One place where this becomes incredibly useful is when we talk about major water and sewer expense, because the water and sewer infrastructure is probably in the worst state in terms of its condition. And because of the drought of a few years ago, cities, really had a hard time paying the bills because there was no water revenue coming in. Interestingly enough, when it finally rained, the cities that had learned how to conserve water did not start buying water like they did before. Wichita Falls is a great example of this. So those cities all of a sudden see a gigantic impact on their water and sewer fund because they're not selling water the way they used to, and yet they still have to go improve infrastructure. So that's when you talk about the P3 world even goes to the level of privatizing. That's when you could go to a P3 opportunity and say, look, we don't want to be in the sewer business anymore. Buy this plant, take us out of it, enter into a long-term maintenance and operation agreement, answering to a board that the city appoints. Those are going to happen frequently, and they're going to happen a lot in Texas over the next few years. And that's why the state has set up, an entity essentially to do this. The state has a facilities corporation that was created for no other purpose than to monitor and provide support for P3 projects. So they're here to stay, and they're going to continue to grow. It just depends on what works best for each city.
Well, and I agree with you. I think that that's something we most definitely need to look into different aspects. I just don't know for sure that this is, on a capital project like this, it's non-revenue generating. If it makes, I'm not completely sold that it does.
I understand.
And another thing is the timing. This is something we're looking at doing in we have till February 16th to get this on the ballot, which I'm assuming it's going to be on the May ballot unless something changes, which I don't foresee that happening. Well, it's pretty difficult to negotiate an agreement and do this within.
Well, I agree.
This short period of time.
Yeah, if you are set and May ballot is established, then I don't think that's probably not going to happen that quickly. This would really be a circumstance where you hadn't decided yet what the financing mechanism was going to be, and just looking at this as another alternative.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Councilmember Fowler. Are there any other questions from the council for Mr. Petty? Well, it's 5 minutes until 7. Do we want to continue on with our workshop regarding this, or do we? We still have Mr. Campbell and also Mr. Baggett, who you can ask questions to as well. Or do we want to schedule another meeting? Councilmember Fowler.
Oh, I think I'm prepared. I'm still where I was at before. If we're looking for a point of direction, I still think we need to go out for bond. I think we need to set it for May. I think that's a given. I think we need to. I don't think we're going to have time. I think there's meetings that we probably need to have, but I think we need to get to staff some direction.
Okay.
I still think that, we talked about a 5-acre tract. I still think that the property south of the library makes sense. I think a multi-story building that houses, after Mr. Campbell, after he came in last week, he clarified a lot of the questions I had, and, I think that makes, I think it's not only an opportunity that makes sense, but then I think that it's a facility that would work for us and meet our needs, and I think it would give the staff time to start working on something that we could finalize. I mean, we're just in a very short cycle here, so
right.
That's where I am. So,
well, Mr. Brown.
brought something up. What would be wrong with going for the bond election, getting that set up, and then if we did negotiate a P3 and then we didn't have to use the bonds, help me out. What do we get into as the P3 would be our backup to the bonds and maybe not have to use the bonds?
That's a question for Wayne, our legal counsel.
I think it would be, wouldn't it?
Certainly have that option. You can issue certificates of obligation, and if you don't want to spend them, you don't have to, but it would be prudent to come up with a course of action beforehand, I think, to know which direction you want to go in. You're going to a little bit of effort to issue the COs, and there are costs involved with that, so it would certainly be prudent to know whether or not you want to utilize them, and if not, then consider one of these alternative financing arrangements.
Thank you.
Dr. Strong.
Mayor, I think there's a lot of angle we need to discuss about this deal. I request, if possible, we have a special meeting, a workshop, whatever. In my opinion, I don't like to have the private sector come in our city and own everything. And we have to pay them rent, because this is a city. This is not a vehicle. We don't want to lease everything. By the way, I stick with the original plan. The city hall can be built with the private sector. But the police station and fire department, we can, put on one election, let the citizen in Haltom City make decision to see what they want. If they turn it down, then we go different direction. And that's my opinion, Mayor.
Thank you, sir. Well, both Mr. Campbell and also Mr. Baggett are here. They're taking time out of their evening to come and attend this meeting with us. I do want to give you both an opportunity to come up. You've heard some of the conversation that we've had. If I have any input or any comments you'd like to make, we'd certainly like to hear from you. Councilmember Watkins, did you have a?
I'm good. Yeah. And I've been out for 6 weeks. So.
Oh, okay. I just wanted to give you an opportunity. If y'all had any other input, you were both. Yeah, you were certainly at the meeting last week. We had last week. Councilmember Watkins.
I find myself in the unusual position of agreeing with Mr. Fowler. The problem I would have with Mr. Brown's suggestion would be if your bond failed, then we'd be sitting out there doing something that the people have just voted against. I don't think that would be prudent. Might be, but I don't think it would be. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Watkins. Councilmember Nunn.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm sorry, I have all called. I'm still of the opinion. I agree, and I have for a while with what I've said before, and I still think that. I'd still like to see one building. I'd like it on the south end of the library. That 43 acres, what we were explained last week, is that it's just, it's really a beautiful property. And with no encumbrances on it, it's worth more for development. There's no revenue generated by the police and the city hall, per se. So I'm still, I think we're almost beating a dead horse. I mean, I think there are a few of us that agree with this, and I'd really like to see it just go ahead and just talk more. I mean, just kind of stop here and just kind of go with this. We're wasting time. We need to be spending it on other things. I'd also like to look at adding on to the other fire station and pursuing that, if at all we can, with the church. Okay. And just adding on to that. So that's my opinion.
Yes, sir, Council.
I'm glad Ms. Nunn reminded me of something. David, I'm going to put you on the spot here. One of the things that Rex and I asked David to do since last Tuesday was kind of go and do a site inspection out there to see if that was a workable project. And he went out there today, I believe, and we briefly met before council, and he kind of gave me an update. But David, if you could kind of tell him your thoughts on that site.
So I went out to the site. That is definitely the high point. And the west and the north faces are about, it's a retaining wall about 4 feet tall. So let's talk about the south side first. The south side, you have about 80 to 84 feet from the edge of the tower to the right of way. City of Haltom City has a 30-foot setback. So you really only got 50 feet to play with. And in that 50 feet, I think I counted 7 water meters in the dirt, plus a fire hydrant. So all the utilities out of the out of the water tower are heading south and then moving that way through your city. So the biggest piece of land that you have out there is already encumbered with utilities. If you go east, I don't know if I can make the driveways work to just extend it to the east. And you're putting it right on the face of the road, which is a very busy road, Haltom. If you head north, from the edge of the water tower out, by the time you get to the edge of what a building could be, you're going to have to buy some property, because the retaining wall is about 27 feet from the edge of the water tower. One bay is 18 feet for a fire station. We programmed in 3 bays. So you're looking at, 54 feet to just have the building itself. So you're going to have to buy some property from the church, and the drop-off from the water tower as you head north just keeps going. So then to try to program the building, to try to find where that floor plan is going to be, to have the trucks be able to pull in, pull out, and to get the firemen to those trucks might be very difficult. And then I don't think west is an option. You're coming out on a one-way road basically, or you got to looper out and come, head east to get on the road that goes north and south Haltom. So, professional opinion, adding on to that doesn't make a lot of sense. There's going to be a lot of hoops to jump through and a lot of money to be spent to make it a viable project. Personal opinion, professional opinion.
I appreciate that. I didn't know if due diligence had been done on that property, to really look at it. It looks like you really did a fine job of it.
30-minute due diligence, but
just looking at it and thinking, oh, maybe this would work, and not seeing all the water meters and all of those encumbrances, I guess you could say, puts a different perspective on it. So thank you very much for that.
David, let me ask you one more question. I know you're working on the concept now for Fire Station 3, your folks are.
Yes.
When that's complete, is it possible to conceptually take that footprint that you create to put it on that piece of property that we were talking about? Is there a way to configure that on where Fire Station 3 sits now to see the issues on fitting it, or is that just apples and oranges?
Fitting it with the water tower there?
Let's just say just the bay component of that, of your plans.
A bay component is a box.
Right.
Okay, each bay is 18
right.
feet. It's 54 feet wide by the length of the truck plus. So I can take that rectangle and put it on any piece of property you want. It's understanding where the utilities are, and I know we've looked that up, and they're all in that on the south side. So I can create that exhibit if you need.
So, and what I'm getting at is if we asked you to create that exhibit, seeing the problems with the location of the utilities and the slope, is there any way in your mind that you could put those bays anywhere where it would avoid all that, or show us, for example, if we wanted to approach Glenview and say, hey, we need some of this property, would you be able to say or show us this is how much property we need?
Oh, easily.
Okay.
And we'd also put on the truck turning radiuses and what the driveway would
right.
have to be. I think the key when you start talking about the church property is the fall off.
Right.
Where is the floor plate of that versus the floor plate of the living quarters? And it's got to drop down a little bit. So now the connection between the living quarters and the fire station is not ideal.
Right.
You're talking about stairs, you're talking about ramps, you're adding that in, or you're bringing a lot of fill. Just keep it up to the height and creating a taller retaining wall if you head north, or a little bit of a taller retaining wall as you head west.
Okay.
So it's doable to lay that out, yes.
Okay.
Anything else?
Councilmember Thompson, do you have a question or a comment? Got it? Okay. Well, thank you, sir. And so there's no other questions or comments regarding this. The time now is 7:05. Do we need a break, or do we want to just continue right on into our regular council meeting? Need a break? Okay. We'll adjourn at 7:05 and we'll come back at 7:15. Okay, I want to welcome everyone to our December 11, 2017 City Council meeting. The time now is 7:18. First item on the agenda is the invocation of Pledge of Allegiance by Dr. Ann Trong. If you would, please stand.
Please rise. Heavenly Father, we come to you today asking for your guidance, wisdom, and support as we begin this meeting. Help us to engage in meaningful discussion, allow us to grow closer as a group, and nurture the bonds of community. Dear God, we seek your help to protect our troops serving overseas and throughout the nation. Our citizens, our staff, our police officer, and our firefighter in the U.S., and especially in Haltom City. Bless us this meeting with your intelligence and help us to mend our differences and reach agreement satisfactory for all. And continue to remind us that all that we do here today, all that we accomplish is for the pursuit of truth, for the greater glory of you. We ask these things in your name. Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state, under God, one and indivisible.
Thank you, Dr. Trong. Moving right along to our announcements and events, our City Secretary, Art Camacho.
Thank you, Mayor. The announcements for December 11th, 2017, in the Parks and Recreation, the Keep Haltom City Beautiful will hold its annual holiday decorating contest starting today until the 17th with 18 winners from homes across the city. The Haltom City community calendars are now available and can be picked up at City Hall, the Rec Center, and the Public Library, and are limited to one per household. The Haltom Senior Center will hold its Christmas party on Friday, December 15th at 10:30 a.m. with special guest, State Representative Stephanie Click. There are many other activities going on at this event, such as a quilt raffle, which is being held outside, along with the $12 cookbooks for sale, and a sing-along, so please check the website. On Saturday, December 16th, the Haltom Senior Citizens, not the Senior Citizen Center, but they're going to have it at the Senior Citizen Center, but this is a different group. The Haltom Senior Citizens will be hosting their Christmas party, where they'll have music, and it begins Saturday the 16th at 10:30. In addition, the New Year's Eve celebration will be held Friday, December 29th at 10:30 a.m. So seniors need to make the reservation by calling 817-834-8021. The Carson Street is still under State Highway 121, will still remain closed for several more months to a year, and the frontage road information will be displayed on the variable message signboards. Citizens are invited to a free concert by the Haltom City Chorale on December 16th at 2 p.m. in the chapel at Victory Baptist Church at Haltom City at 2910 Layton Avenue. The Christian Center of Fort Worth invites everyone to their Christmas dinner on Monday, December 25th from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. Kids will receive a free toy, and all will receive a free bag of groceries, and it's located at 4301 Northeast 28th Street. Waste Connections will be offering free Christmas tree recycling at their transfer station at 2120 Miss Drive from December 26th through January 14th from 8 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. The 2018 Haltom Stampede is Saturday, February 10th at the Rec Center, and online registration is now open, and sponsorships are available, so you can contact the Rec Center if you choose to do it. Also, the Community Projects wants to thank everyone who attended and supported the Christmas on Broadway on December 2nd. It was a great success, and they estimated they had over 2,000 attendees this year. And they want to give thanks to the elementary school choirs for providing the entertainment, and the Haltom High Schools for their much volunteerism, as well as the mayor and the city council, city staff, the community, and the board volunteers, and all the local businesses involved. And a special thanks is given to Santa and Mrs. Claus for spreading cheer and joy this Christmas season. In the public library, teen programs, family movie night, adult GED and ESL classes, and other library activities are on the library's website for the date and times. A special holiday bedtime story time will be held on Thursday, December 14th at 6:30 p.m., and Santa and Mrs. Claus will also be present for photos, and they're asking all those participants to wear your pajamas. City Hall will be closed on Monday, December 24th, and also on Tuesday, Monday, December 25th, and Tuesday, December 26th, and also on Monday, January 1st for the holiday season. And that's our announcement.
Thank you, Mr. Camacho. Moving right along to presentations, City Employee Longtime Service Award. Fire Chief Perry Bynum.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Council. Tonight, I have a huge opportunity to introduce not only a long-term employee of this city, but also a person who grew up in this city. I worked for his dad. His dad served 32 years in this city. Lieutenant Tyrone, would you come up to the front, please, sir? Bring your family. I really appreciate the council and the mayor and the manager allowing us to do this. It's a chance for you to see these long-term employees that put so much time and their families. That's what Haltom City is special about, is family. And that's what this fire department is special about. So, Chris, first of all, I'd like you to introduce your family.
This is my wife, Spring, and my oldest daughter, Caitlin, my son, Isaiah, my youngest daughter, Naomi, and I have a son, Christopher, that's away at college, couldn't make it here tonight.
Wow. Well, thank you. Thank you for your service. Thank you for your family. Thank you for giving up your time, everything he does, and because he does a great job. I can't say enough about you, Chris. I've known you since you was a kid, and I mean, you are just an example of what we are in the fire department. So I'd like to present you with certificate of appreciation for 20 years of dedicated service to this city. So thank you for your service. Thank you. Something?
I thought it was just getting a certificate. You know, I couldn't do what I do if I didn't have my family and my wife to support me, to be away all the hours that I'm away. But, you know, to go to work every day, I feel like is, you know, what God wants us to do. But I don't have to go to work. I get to go to a place I love. I get to hang out with my friends and try to do the right thing. And to be able to provide for my family in doing that is just a blessing. I love what I do, and Chief Bynum's a big part of that. He helps create the environment that I love to come to, and I thank y'all for putting him in place. I've been praying for my leaders for a long time, and I'm looking at a lot of my leaders right now that I've been praying for, and you know, with a recent promotion of Chief Jacobs and Perry Bynum, I know that God's hearing me and working through y'all to put those people in place to make a great environment for me to earn a living, but also to serve the citizens. So thank y'all.
There's a saying that says, if you love what you do, you'll never work a day in your life.
Yes, sir.
Lieutenant Tyrone, thank you for everything you've done. Thank you. Oh, they want to do it? I'll let them do that first. Okay, moving right along to the minutes, to the regular agenda, the minutes, consideration and/or action regarding approval of the minutes of the November 27, 2017 City Council meeting. Councilmember Thompson.
Thank you, Mayor. I make a motion, please, to accept the minutes as written for November the 27th, 2017.
Thank you, ma'am. We have a motion for approval. Is there a second? Dr. Trong.
Man, Council, I'm second.
Thank you, Dr. Strong. A motion for approval in a second. If you would please signify your votes. Councilmember Thompson. Okay. Motion passes. Thank you, Council. Moving right along to agenda item number 2, Public Works Vehicle Purchase. Ms. Carver. Welcome.
Good evening, Council, Mayor. This is for agenda item 2 for replacement of a sanitary sewer camera vehicle. The 2018 budget provided for the replacement of a sanitary sewer camera vehicle for a total of $180,000. With the new equipment, the city would be able to meet the requirements of TCEQ and better maintain the sanitary sewer system. Current equipment is over 12 years old. And with that, I'll leave it open.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the council? Councilmember Grove.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And Greg might be able to answer. We had that mandel that we had to, on the Bacchus roads, we checked the sewer on that just to make sure everything was in compliance. Would this be able to do some of that also, since you are pushing a camera?
No, the mandrel's used to make sure that the pipe's not egged,
yep,
or that it doesn't have a sag in it. The camera's a much smaller device.
No, but what I'm saying, can you throw an attachment on it, and since you're pushing?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay. But I'm trying to see if, like a Swiss Army knife thing.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks.
Dr. Trong.
Yes, ma'am. The current vehicle is 11 years old, right? Like you said?
Just over 12.
12? It's not working anymore, or because the technology now require a new one, or what?
Both the vehicle's in bad shape and the camera unit doesn't even work. In fact, we just had to televise a sewer on Fincher, and while the camera will go into a sewer main and show you video, it doesn't record. We obviously need it to record to be able to come back to it, tell where we need to do the repair. So it's gotten to the point right now, when we use this piece of equipment, we have an employee with an iPhone recording the camera so that we can have a visual record of the inside of the sanitary sewer.
What do you expect the lifetime of the new vehicle, like the camera and vehicle, would be last for how long, and under warranty for how many years?
Can you answer? I would think the lifespan would be, again, somewhere around 10 to 12 years.
Yes, sir.
But in terms of warranty, we don't have that information. It wasn't on the quote.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Tron. Councilmember Fowler.
Thanks, Mr. Van Noon. What was your anticipation of would you keep and utilize the surplus equipment, or would it be auctioned off?
We'd probably auction off the existing.
So it wouldn't be worth?
No.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Are there any Councilmember Thompson?
Thank you. One question. This was already incorporated in the budget for this year. Am I correct?
Correct. We had budgeted $180,000, and because it's over $50,000, we still have to go back to the council. I do want to highlight, it's in your agenda packet, that off the buy board it's $185,000. So we're suggesting taking $5,000 out of the water and sewer fund and transferring it into this to come up with $185,000. So I don't want to mislead you. $180,000 was budget, and what we're requesting is the purchase of a $185,000 vehicle.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Thompson. Are there any other questions or comments? Okay, seeing none, we are in line for a motion. Thank you, Ms. Carver, and also Mr. Van Nieuwenhuis for your presentation. Who's there? Dr. Tron.
Even without the warranty, information, but I will make a motion. Mayor and Council, I want to make a move to approve the purchase of a sanitary sewer camera vehicle to the vendor named Bybor Cooperative.
Thank you, sir. I have a motion for approval. Councilmember Nunn.
Thank you, Mayor. That's for a second.
Thank you. A motion for approval in a second. If you would, please signify your votes. Motion passes unanimous. Thank you, Council. Moving on to agenda item number 3, ordinance number O-2017-030-03. Ms. Song, welcome.
Mayor and the City Council, this agenda item is to approve the issuance of certificate of obligation bond, $7 million. And when we are preparing for the budget, the City Council approved the Fathom Advanced Meter Infrastructure Project, and this project will cost over $8 million. And this morning we received competitive bids and to issue the bond, and our interest rate come up at about 2.47%. So I have Mr. Andrew Fitman from the Semco Capital Markets, and he can give you more information on the issuance of the bond.
Thank you very much, Ms. Fung. Mayor, Council, my name is Andrew Friedman, financial advisor to the city, along with my partner, Mark McCliney. As Ms. Fung stated, we went out for bid this morning for $7 million in certificates of obligation. This is a competitive bid process where we put out the parameters of the bond sale, the CO sale, to Wall Street and the investing public, and then receive everyone's best bids. That happened today at noon. The short packet of information I handed out for you on the dais before we started outlines we received 4 bids, the best of which came from R.W. Baird, and the TIC, meaning the true interest cost, which is roughly the average interest rate for the borrowing at that 2.468%. That was substantially below what we were forecasting going through this process, and so we have done better and saved $240,000 in interest payments from what we looked at and what you all looked at the notice of intention meeting. So we've come in better. We'll pay less in interest. We're going to put $7 million into your project fund when we close on January 11th. The numbers behind this first page are the final numbers that we can walk through. You can see, starting at the top of that sources and uses page, we'll issue $6,720,000 in certificates of obligation. They generate a premium of $418,000. That's a cash premium that the bond purchaser is going to pay the city. Ultimately, we're going to put $7 million exactly into your project fund at closing. The rest of those funds will go to pay for the bond purchaser's discount, as well as the cost of issuance you incur to go through the process for bond attorneys, financial advisors, the bond rating, etc. Behind that page, you can see the bond pricing, outlines the maturity payback schedule, the coupons, and the yields. Behind that is your annual debt service repayment schedule. We'll pay bond principal annually. We'll pay interest semi-annually, as we do with all of our other bond issues, the first payment of which will take place August 1st, 2018. We will culminate with a final payment in 2032. One thing that I do want to point out is going through this process, we updated our credit rating with Standard & Poor's Rating Service. We maintain and had our rating affirmed at AA-. The city has a very, very good credit rating. AA- is only a couple of notches down from the highest investment grade rating one can have, which is AAA. What they point out in their rating report, and that I want to make you all aware of, is that we are starting to experience weak budgetary performance, meaning that the city is drawing down over the last 4 years general fund balance. To this point, that hasn't resulted in a negative credit rating action because we have such strong reserves to absorb those losses. Our concern, the credit rating agency's concern, is that if we continue to do this for a number of years, we'll become structurally imbalanced, and then at that point they would likely take negative credit rating action against us. And so I want to make you all aware of that. As if we continue to draw down our general fund reserves, support the general fund from utility fund revenues, that creates a structural imbalance where we're now relying on our utility system, relying on other enterprise funds too much,
and we'll see our credit rating go down, our cost of borrowing will go up, and it's just generally a position that we don't want to find ourselves in. And so want to make you all aware of that. Standard & Poor's obviously looks closely at it. We have such strong reserve levels, though, that we can continue to do that, but only to a certain point. So with that, process went very smoothly. We received very, very good bids. At 2.46%, we were very, very pleased with that outcome. I think we'd projected that we'd lock in interest rates around 2.75%, so we're pleasantly surprised with this result. I'm happy to answer any and all questions that you have related to the process, the numbers. I can go into more detail if you like, but I turn it over to you for any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Freeman. Are there any questions from the council for Mr. Freeman? Councilmember Fowler.
Mr. Friedman, on years 25, 26, 27, what was the reason for the increase from a flat 3% to jump to 4% for those 3 years?
That's a matter of how they coupon their bid. When we set the parameters for the bond sale, we allow the bond purchasers, the firms that are bidding on this, to put together a structure that works for the ultimate bond purchasers. And so they come up with their own couponing and yields. And what you see there is they had purchasers in those years that want a 4% coupon rather than a 3% coupon. The yield that you ultimately pay is a little bit less. And so in terms of the yield to maturity, it ranges pretty close to what it would have otherwise been. It's not costing you more to have that 4% coupon there. It will.
It's how they structure it.
It's how they structure it. And so ultimately that's how we arrive at that best bid. If the next person had bid 3% in that place, ultimately you paid more in interest because they made up for it somewhere else along the yield curve.
Right. Okay. And explain to me for clarification, and you can educate me on your call dates from year 28 through 32. Call price is 100%. So is that the buyout on?
Yes. So when we sell, and typically what you see with city, municipality, GO bonds is a 10-year call at par, meaning that in 10 years we have the opportunity to call in those bonds from the investor at 100% of their price, meaning at no penalty.
Right.
Sometimes in the past you would see call options where if you wanted to call the bonds early, meaning before they matured on their own, you might have to pay 101% of what they were worth, meaning a 1% penalty. This is outlining that we take them at zero cost to the city.
And that's year 10 on.
And we've structured that at a 10-year call. You go any sooner than that, and bond investors will penalize you in the interest rate you pay. So it's very standard practice to have a 10-year call.
Okay. And one other thing on that, on your TIC, and define TIC for me, please.
True interest cost.
Okay. So,
and
that's your blended. That's your blended throughout the.
Yeah, when you take every single maturity's yield to maturity and average it out.
And then explain to me why it would be your TIC would be at 2.6, and yet your average coupon's 3.21.
It's not looking at the cost of issuance and underwriter's discount.
Okay, so it doesn't include that.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
And
those
all
are just upfront costs that that we're absorbing. That's not part of the.
Yes, sir.
The note.
Those are the costs for the bond attorney's legal opinion, for financial advisor, for your bond rating, the attorney general, various fees that are charged by all the different people that work on.
Make sure you guys can come here. We got to pay you. Then is what you're saying.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And it's on a. Of course, this is. You had made mention to the fact that we're drawing down general funds. You deal with a lot of. I know Mr. McCliney. I've been involved with Mr. McCliney for many, many years, and respect his opinion. But from what you see from other communities or other cities that are involved, what do you see as our 20% is a number that we set years ago to try to.
Your fund balance?
To maintain a 20% fund balance, and it's just a number that we've.
25% is the standard. I think that's what GFOAT recommends for fund balance reserves. It's what Standard & Poor's and Moody's and Fitch prefer to see in terms of fund balance. 3 months operating expenses is what they're looking for.
So when we're shooting at 20% and we're drawing down general fund, our fund balances are around 20%, but we're still leaning heavily on the general fund. It's your recommendation that we do something to make sure that we...
Well, the Standard & Poor's is, I think, pointing out that they're seeing a trend here, that you've been doing it for 4 years, and the concern is that as you continue to draw down your general fund reserves, you only have an ability on the maintenance and operations side of your budget to increase revenues at no more than 8% of your tax rate each year. So if you get to the structural imbalance, it becomes hard to overcome because you can only ever raise your tax rate that 8%, and that's in today's environment. The legislature has attempted to take action to even reduce that ability further, which will just set you further behind the 8 ball if you find yourself in that position. But there's certainly nothing wrong with building up a surplus and then drawing down that fund balance to the policy level that you previously set. The concern they're just pointing out, it's why they haven't taken negative credit rating action to this point, is that we haven't reached that threshold yet.
But we're trending. What you're saying is we're trending.
We've done it for the last 4 years. We're drawing down our fund balance.
So it's important that we take that into consideration and understand that a truly healthy fund balance is 25%. Ours, we're shooting for 20, and we're still drawing down on it. And so,
yes, sir.
We need to take that into account as a board. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Councilmember Fowler. Are there any other questions or comments from the council for Mr. Freeman? Okay, seeing none, we are now in line for a motion. Yeah, and remember, we have specific language that has to be read into the motion.
I think the language is for you, Mayor, because it talks about council member made the motion, councilman seconded by this council member.
Last time, let me just double check that.
It's in the staff report.
Okay. Yeah, that's fine. Okay. So whoever wants to, Councilmember Grove.
Mr. Mayor, I'll make a motion
that
we approve ordinance Oscar-2017-030-03 for the Certificate of Obligations Series 2018.
Thank you, Councilmember Grove. Councilmember Brown.
And that's for a second.
Mayor, you did not open up a public hearing on this, did you? Why don't you open the public
Okay,
hearing?
we can do that. Let's see, the time now is 7:45, and I'll open up a public hearing for anyone in the audience wishing to speak regarding this agenda item. Again, this is agenda item number 3. Okay, seeing none, I'll close the public hearing at 7:46. Yeah, and a motion has been made by Councilmember Grow and seconded by Councilmember Brown that the City Council adopt an ordinance authorizing the issuance of the City of Haltom City, Texas Certificates of Obligation Series 2018. Council, if you would please signify your votes. Councilmember Brown. Okay. Motion passes unanimous. Thank you, Council. Moving on to agenda item number 4, final plat being P-015-17. Ms. Batchelor, welcome.
Evening, Mayor and Council. This is the application of Goodwin and Marshall on behalf of A Breeze 3 Limited for approval of a final plat creating High Point Addition Phase 2 from a portion of Block 3 and 4 of Fossil Ridge subdivision and a portion of Lot 1R, Block 4 of Lots 1R and 2R, Block 4 of Fossil Ridge Addition, located in the PD Plan Development for SF2 single-family residential use, containing approximately 25.424 acres of land, locally known as 4805 Northeast Loop 820, and unaddressed property. The applicant proposes to create 225 residential lots in accordance with ordinance number 2014-00614, the Fossil Lake Plan Development, which was approved by City Council at final reading on May 12, 2014. The parkland dedication fee of $56,250 will be due before the final plat can be filed. And if we'll look up here on the screen, if you recall, the last time we had phase 1, which was the other property that's not outlined in yellow. So this is phase 2 of that development. And this is the layout of the properties with the common areas and amenities on it. The applicant is here if you have any questions of staff or the applicant.
Thank you, Ms. Batchelor. Are there any questions from the council for either Ms. Batchelor or the applicant? Councilmember Grove.
Hey, Ms. Batchelor, you sent out notices for 200 feet, correct?
Yes.
And do we know how many we sent and what were their breakdowns?
There were 11 property owners notified, and we received nothing opposed, in favor, or return to sender.
All right, thank you.
Is there any other questions or comments from the council for staff or the applicant? Okay, seeing none, I'll now open the public hearing at 7:48 for anyone in the audience wishing to speak regarding this agenda item. Again, this is agenda item number 4, being a final plat. Okay, seeing none, I'll close the public hearing at 7:49, and we are now in line for a motion. Don't everybody jump in at once. Councilmember Grove.
Mr. Mayor, I make a motion to approve plat Papa-015-17 for the High Point Addition, Phase 2, final plat.
Thank you, sir. We have a motion for approval. Dr. Trong.
Mayor and Council, I'm second.
Thank you, sir. We have a motion for approval in a second. If you would, please signify your votes. Motion passes unanimous. Fantastic. Moving right along to agenda item number 5, being ordinance number O-2017-029-15. Again, Ms. Batchelor.
This is to conduct a public hearing for an application of Don Denman of Denman Commercial for a conditional use permit for a wrecking auto salvage yard in the M1 Industrial and M2 Heavy Industrial District in accordance with zoning ordinance O-2002-03215 and section 42-121 on lot 3 through 5 of block 29, lot 1 through 3 of block 30, abstract 1424, tract 2D, and lot 6R, block 29 out of the Watauga Addition, locally known as 6001 and 6035 Huddleston Street. The applicant requests approval of a conditional use permit for a wrecking auto salvage yard. The CLEP lists the property described above as industrial. On November 28th, P&Z recommended conditional approval of CU 1217 by a vote of 4-0. The conditions being that no dismantling of vehicles will take place on-site or selling of parts. If storage is done on-site with stacking, the height will not exceed 7 feet in height. The final condition was that no vehicles on-site taller than 7 feet will be located anywhere other than between the fire lane and south property line. I'll show you here in just a second on Exhibit B. The city's comprehensive land use plan designates the subject site as industrial. The proposed wrecking auto salvage yard is typically considered an industrial use. The wrecking auto salvage yard use is being proposed for vacant land with neighboring properties consisting of a gas well site, vacant land, commercial buildings, and a non-conforming residential building. If you look up here on the screen, this is the property that we're discussing. This small little area here is the entryway from Huddleston, which will be their main entrance. There is a replat scheduled for January due to some modifications on a access easement that's required, and there will be an entryway here. This is the gas well site. This is multifamily vacant land. This property is being purchased by the applicant from the city. This is commercial. Right here on this lot is the non-conforming residential. Commercial here on the southeast corner of the property. As I mentioned, this is the entryway, designated fire lane, proposed building. This red highlighted area is where as it mentioned on the exhibit in the ordinance, where they cannot stack anything over 7 feet. This will be like for large trucks, semis, things of that nature. And this is the detention required by engineering. This is the non-conforming residential property. Across the street, this is where they do fire truck assembly modifications. This is one of the buildings to the southeast corner of the property. The other building that you saw in the aerial. This is the mutual access from Huddleston that borders the non-conforming residential on the north and the commercial building. I think it's either a plumber or a landscaper. This is the vacant lot to the west of the non-conforming residential. There's Donnie's sign showing that he's coming soon. This is a adult daycare that's in a building that used to be a taekwondo building. The applicant is here. Fortunately, had a little mishap on his way here, but he did make it to the meeting. And I'm here available for any questions or the applicant.
Thank you, Ms. Batchelor. Are there any questions or comments from Ms. Batchelor or the applicant? Councilmember Fowler.
This may be for you, Ms. Batchelor, maybe for the applicant. On the condition, can you go back to that plat with the red line? Okay, is this where it comes into play as far as, I'm glad the P&Z's, working hard and doing these, making these stipulations.
That's
and
a
all
designated area, yes, sir.
But let me ask you this, or let me ask for the applicant. I know that the applicant does most of the contracts with the city for Rex, and I think they may have handled that deal on 820. I don't know if that was ours or not with the
one at Iron Horse.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that was in our city or North Hills or whatever, but does that allow, do we need to make sure that when you have such as semis, things that they haul in like that, or, box trailers, does that allow enough room for them to, if we stipulate that one area, for them to operate and
I'll defer
manage
that to
properly?
the applicant, but he seemed agreeable that would be enough.
I'm fine with the stacking, the 7-foot stacking and all, but I just didn't know if it, I just don't want to create a problem if from your professional standpoint, and from theirs, I guess a combination, if that works.
Donnie, can you come up here a second? That area that's designated there by the detention pond, was that going to be enough room for semis?
I think it possibly could. We may extend that from time to time, but I think that should handle it. I would think.
Sir, if you would just state your name for the
record. Oh, I'm sorry. Don Denman.
Thank you.
Well, now's the time. If we need to extend it, I think, Ms. Batchelor, do you not agree that now would be the time to do that where we don't have any code violations? And
sure, and because this is an ordinance, there will be a second reading, so if we need to amend that, now would be the time to do it.
I just don't. The property to due west of that's the oil pad site, correct?
Correct.
And then you said the applicant owns the property to the north?
Yes, between the church and this property, there's that one that he's in the process of buying.
Okay.
So if you look, you can't see it, but there's a access easement that goes to the drill site down the hill.
I can see where it's highlighted.
Right there. He's proposing to put that on the other property, so this will be abandoned and placed on the properties buying from the city.
Well, why wouldn't you have everything then everything to the south of the fire lane and to the west of the fire lane to be utilized for, not stacking, but if you had vehicles that were larger than. So I'm just trying to prevent a code deal where we come up and we're, codes. We need to try to get these things done ahead of time, so that if you had, like, who's to say that it doesn't make better sense to put their taller,
in this area here?
Right.
P&Z's concern was visibility-wise, because you have a street coming off of Western Center, that this being farther away from the screening fence, which they are required an 8-foot screening fence, so he's going to do an R panel with a trim cap, that if it was here, it might be more visible as you're coming down Rusk from Western Center.
But doesn't Sally make the turn right there, a hard 90?
It makes a hard turn, yes.
So how would it be visible if it's...
Because you got the vacant land here.
But the applicant owns that, and it would... as an applicant, do you have plans on developing that in the future?
Yes, sir. Yep, probably.
I mean, I'm fine with it, and I appreciate what they did. I think it makes sense to modify that to where everything south and west of the fire lane, just nothing's over in the, to me, the visibility triangle is the everything north and east of the fire lane from the way that property lays out. Can you go to that other?
The aerial?
Right, that aerial that you had. I mean, you can see where Sally, I think, is it completely grassed yet, or is it?
It's on its way.
It's pretty rough.
Yeah, I thought it was almost completely grassed now. But that property, that fire lane, does it not come in? Where would it come in? Just
It'll line up with Rusk coming in from the north and then makes the hard 90 over to Huddleston.
So you really wouldn't see any of that anyway if there's... Okay.
So
Okay.
Your proposal is for this area in addition to this area? Because remember, this is detention.
Right. But you can't put anything in the detention anyway.
That's not to say that he couldn't put other stuff there as long as he had room for semis and trailers and all that, right?
Well, excluding the detention, well, I guess you could in the,
That would just be reserved for semis and box trucks and commercial vehicles.
No, I don't have a problem doing anything. I'm just trying to prevent from us having a code situation where, if they're hauling, box reefer trucks, whatever you want to call them, whatever they're termed, but they're, I don't know what the height on those is, probably 12 foot or so.
Sure, you're going to see them above that.
You don't see them anywhere. But I wouldn't want to see them in that, like I say, the north and the east of that fire lane. But the other, I don't know that it makes sense to us limit it just to one area, because what if you have, 3 or 4 in there, and it may make sense in the future to put them on that other side.
So expand the area from here to the northwest corner in addition to. You good with that?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
The applicant's amicable to that.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Fowler. Dr. Trung.
Ms. Bachelor, can you go back one more screen, please? Okay, what applicant asking for tonight is 2 yellow square spot, right?
These two will be replatted. That'll come to you probably in January.
What in behind them? The reason I ask this because I'm sorry I did not receive my packet loaded in my iPad until I come to City Hall.
Okay.
I did send a couple email and Donna told me we have a problem with the internet. I didn't have a chance to go out there and look at. But in your presentation, look at around there. They have beautiful business around there. Do you think we should approve for the junkyard, the salvage vehicle in front of them? Do they have any problem with the neighbor or no?
There was one notice returned to sender that was not delivered. Usually Councilman Grow asks me this information.
I'm sorry, Ms. Rowe.
Well, there were 13 that were sent, and I guess you said one.
One was returned to sender, and the one for 6003 Huddleston from Mike Scott says, we recently purchased 6003 Huddleston. Had this been there, I never purchased the property. It will ruin the property value. So that would be the property.
Where is it?
Right here. That M1 that's kind of L-shaped. Doesn't directly adjoin this property, but it is in the 200-foot notice area.
Yes, ma'am. Tell me one more time about a yellow land behind it. What is that?
This is a well site, and currently there's an access easement that comes across here. The applicant is proposing to abandon that access easement and place it on this property that he's buying from the city.
Okay, but I wish I had an opportunity to go out there and look at that,
Thank you, Dr. Strong. Councilmember Grove.
Oh, I think everything, my question was answered by Ms. Batchelor. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Are there any other questions or comments from the council for either Ms. Batchelor or the applicant? Seeing none, I'll now open the public hearing at 8:01 for anyone in the audience wishing to speak regarding this agenda item. Again, this is agenda item number 5. Okay, seeing none, I'll close the public hearing at 8:02, and we are now in line for a motion. Councilmember Fowler.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I move for approval on first reading of conditional use 012-017, as I said on first reading, ordinance numbered 0-2017-029-15, with the recommendations that were sent to us from the Planning and Zoning Commission, with the exception of changing the last condition. The final condition was that the vehicles on site taller than 7 feet be located between the fire lane to the west and to the south of the existing fire lane.
Okay, has everybody got that? Councilmember Thompson.
Thank you, and that is for second, sir.
On first reading with the okay.
Yes.
With the updates, okay. We have a motion for approval in a second. So if you would please signify your votes. Councilmember Watkins. Okay, motion passes unanimous. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Denman. Moving right along to agenda item number 6, replat being P-017-17. Again, Ms. Batchelor.
Thank you.
I need to recuse myself. That's
okay. Please let the record state that Councilmember Watkins will be recusing himself.
This is to conduct a public hearing and consider action on the application of Ghalib Hussein for approval of a replat creating lots 1R Block 8 of the Browning Heights East plat from Lot 4A, Lot 2A, 1 and 3A, Lot 1A and 2B1 of Block 22 Browning Heights East, located in the C2 Commercial District, containing approximately .996 acres and locally known as 5021 and 5025 Broadway Avenue. The applicant proposes to create one lot. The developer is seeking to consolidate 3 parcels into one lot of record to develop a new commercial building. Broadway Avenue and Haltom Road is the existing corner of the proposed lot. The developer is responsible for 100% of all paving, water, sanitary sewer, and drainage infrastructure needed to support the development in accordance with the city's design criteria. On November 28th, the Planning and Zoning Commission recommended approval of P-017-17 by a vote of 4-0. If you'll look up on the screen here, this is the property on the northwest corner of Broadway and Haltom. Again, it's C2. It does abut residential on the west and northwest corner of the property. The purple is the parking lot for Haltom Road Baptist Church. And for some of us that have been around for a long time, about 17 years ago, there was a shopping center here that was demolished. So we're excited to see development of that. And this is the plat showing the designated fire lane. They did go to ZBA for a variance landscape between the 2 drive approaches here. With the required parking and maneuvering, they could only get 6-foot landscaping as opposed to the required 10-foot, so they got relief of 4-foot landscaping last Tuesday night. As you can see, along the residential on the north and the west, they have met and exceeded with the trees in the green space. This is the building that will have a drive-through on the north side. So once you get to the building, this is 2-way from the approach at Haltom. These are the gas canopies. The underground storage tank will be here. It'll be one-way traffic here going out, one-way on this approach. They do have a double approach here, but there's a medium much like they have at Sonic on Denton Highway, so that traffic exiting cannot turn east because of that turn lane on Broadway. They do have the required 35-foot visibility triangle. And they did make contact. Haltom Road Baptist Church was at ZBA the other night. Their concern was that's just a chain link fence. It's not required for screening between commercial to commercial. But they did make contact with the developer, so I don't know what came of that, but there was contact made between the 2 parties. The applicant is here if you have any questions of staff or the applicant.
Thank you, Ms. Batchelor. Are there any questions from the council for either Ms. Batchelor or the applicant? Councilmember Brown.
Ms. Batchelor, you mentioned the center opening. That's one way.
Correct. Here at the middle, it's two-way traffic going in and coming out. However, when they exit, they will have to go westbound on Broadway because of the proximity to the signal light at Broadway and Haltom, and there's that turn lane. Safety-wise, it would not be recommended that they could turn eastbound.
What about the Haltom Road? Is that considered ingress or egress?
Ingress, egress, both.
And so they can go either way on Haltom Road. That's not close enough to the intersection.
Well, you're not crossing the center line if you go south on Haltom. You would just cross it going north. So it wasn't as much of a situation deemed as coming out on Broadway, because Haltom Road's 2-lane, whereas Broadway's 4 with a center turn.
Okay, and the very western exit there,
It's one-way exit only.
One
No,
way.
marked as such.
Okay.
Because you have a one-way going by the drive-through on the north side, so one-way coming around the building. It just made sense to make it exit only.
And can they go east or west on Broadway?
You're far enough away from the intersection.
Okay, and you feel comfortable with that?
Engineering did, and that's their department.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Fowler.
Thank you, Ms. Batchelor. So they've met or exceeded every stipulation other than the one variance for the 6 foot, from 10 foot to 6 foot in the landscape buffer in that one area?
Yes, sir. It'll be a masonry building meeting the 80%, the landscaping, and like I said, I'm not sure what if they've made contact with Haltom Road Baptist Church, but that was their only concern with the development at the public hearing.
Was the chain link fence?
They wanted privacy, but it's not required for development.
Okay, let me, is the applicant available?
Yes.
Good evening, and Ghalib Hussain. Ask you.
Thank you, Mr. Hussain, and we appreciate you, having an interest in looking at developing in our community. Would there be a possibility to, we're trying to, especially close to City Hall and all, make some improvements from an aesthetic standpoint? Would it be possible to look at maybe doing some type of wrought iron fence in that area between for an improvement?
On the property about
the north side, that abuts the church.
That we will be open to that. I mean, it'll be looking better for us as well.
Right, and then that's what we're trying. That's what we're at the end of the day. We're trying to, improve this. And you're not necessarily required to do it, but we would, I would like to suggest that you consider that. And
yes, we will consider that.
Okay. Okay, and I do appreciate y'all. At least it's refreshing to have an applicant that comes that asks for very few variances, especially on a piece of property like this. It's probably a little bit difficult.
Yes, it was difficult, but we just kind of made it work somehow.
Well, it's in there, and like I say, I mean, I understand that, and I do appreciate the efforts you put in it. And this is what we should be getting. We have a lot of properties that have come up on Carson, and some of the other areas, and we don't get anything near this detailed. And we have 17 variances asked for, and so I appreciate the fact that the only one y'all have asked for is the landscaping in that one area, which you exceeded in the other areas. So
no, we had very useful meetings with Ms. Glenna and all the public works department. So we took all the input in there and tried to accommodate whatever we can in there.
Okay, and do y'all operate other facilities?
Yes, the company that we operate is about 25 convenience stores.
Okay, and are any of the others in this immediate area?
They are in Fort Worth, Irving, Azle. I mean, there are quite a few. So not one in Haltom City.
Okay. But I had spoken with Ms. Batchelor earlier to ask some questions on this issue today, and she said that y'all just finished one in Azle that was really nice.
Yes, I mean, I would welcome everyone to look at it, and you will see how good it looks.
Okay. Well, like I say, we welcome you, and we sure appreciate you showing an interest in, the efforts you put forth in the community.
Thank you, sir. I look forward to doing some good business in here.
Right, and we sure would encourage that fence between the church and this property. Thank you, Mr. Hussain.
Thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember Fowler. Are there any other questions from the council for either Ms. Batchelor or the applicant? Seeing none, I'll now open the public hearing at 8:10 for anyone in the audience wishing to speak regarding this agenda item. Again, this is agenda item number 6. Okay, seeing none, I'll close the public hearing at 8:11, and we are now in line for a motion. Dr. Trong.
Mayor and Council, I go ahead and make a move to approve replat item P LIPO-017.17 from applicant Mr. Khalid Hassan, located at 5021 and 5025 Broadway Avenue.
Thank you, sir. We have a motion for approval. Councilmember Brown.
And that's for a second.
Thank you, sir. A motion for approval in a second. If you would, please signify your votes. Okay. Again, let's see here. Motion passes with Councilmember Watkins abstaining. Or recusing himself. Okay. Moving on to the visitors and citizens forum. We have one person wishing to speak, Mr. Willis Odell, regarding Christmas decorations. Mr. Odell, welcome.
Willis Odell. Well, I'm trying to find out who's responsible for the putting up our decorations, and I was aware last year we bought some wreaths and lights. We spent like $20,000 to $30,000 on them, and our building doesn't have any wreaths on them. Somebody didn't put them up. So why did we spend that money if we weren't going to put them up? And what's going on and who's responsible for it? Is it the city leaders, the mayor, who's responsible for putting these Christmas lights up on this city hall? I guess in the fire station and the police department. So we spend a lot of money and we don't have anything done. So who's responsible for it? That's what I want to know.
Thank you, Mr. Odell. I mean, we can't respond to anything, but however, after the meeting, if you want to get with our city manager, he can certainly address your.
Well, I talked to the fire department or something. They said a couple of guys today, just talk to them. Hell, they would probably, volunteer to put them up. And I noticed we got a bucket truck with the city. I took a picture of it today, and we own it. The city owns it. I'm sure they would volunteer to let us use that bucket truck to put them up. So whoever's in charge with this city, I would like them to make some decisions and put that stuff up if we're going to pay for it, like last year. That's all I really have to say.
Okay, and again, if you'll get with our city manager, he can certainly speak to you on that.
Thank you.
Okay. Is there anyone else wishing to speak during the visitors and citizens forum? Okay, seeing none, moving right along to resignation of board members. We had one. Let's see here, Daniel Pearson, I believe it was. Let me get back there. Yes, we have one, Daniel Pearson from the P&Z. If you would, please ratify his resignation with your votes. Welcome back, Councilmember Watkins. Okay, ratification there of the resignation. Do we have any appointments or reappointments? Is there Councilmember Grove?
Mr. Mayor, I would like to appoint Mr. Steve Chapman to the CCPD Red Light Camera Advisory Board. Steve Chapman, he's already on file, so he's well known. So
Very familiar with him. Okay, if you would please ratify Mr. Chapman's appointment to the CCPD. Motion passes. Thank you. Were there any others? Well, I have one to the Beautification Board, Julie Barone. Her application is already on file. This is to the Beautification Board. Thank you. And if there's no other business to discuss, we will now adjourn into executive session pursuant to 551.071 and 072 of the Texas Government Code at 8:17.